happy to be here. And since it has been a very interesting and wild ride, I thought I'd use this 2 minutes to just introduce myself a little bit, since most of you don't know me. I have been coming to the Hudson Valley since I was 18 years old, since I first lived in New York City. And I'm from Littleton, Colorado, and I'm a fly fisherwoman. So this was a great place to come. This is why I love this place. And growing up in Littleton, Colorado is very similar to Kingston. They're almost identical. So this has always felt like home. I've lived here full time for 4 years after a drunk driver broke my spine. Uninsured drunk driver, it's always the way it goes. And this doesn't have to go to physical therapy all the time. You can't work. I stay here. And this has been the most wonderful place in the world to recover. And I love my neighbors here, and I love my friends here. And this is home. This is the only home I have. I don't have a place in the city. I don't have a place anywhere else. This is it. And I started working, my first job ever, I was 14. Right after I turned 14, when you were legally allowed to work, I was a presser in a dry cleaners, which was pretty manky. If you don't have dry cleaners, you know what it's like in the summer, you're pressing clothes, and it's gross. I went to college originally when I was 16, and my nickname at college was Statutory. Sorry. It's pretty funny. I couldn't get a job on campus, so I worked on what we affectionately called the dirt farm, which is where I rolled sod and took it to people's yards. I've had every job in the world, and I started acting randomly when I moved to Manhattan because I needed to pay for school. And it is by far, I can never believe I get paid. It's the most fun job in the world, and I feel so incredibly lucky every time. Because it's stuff that we could all do for free, right? Like, you want to come over, play dress up, play cops and robbers? Like, yeah, but like, you get paid for it. I also want to commend the guys on stage, because this has been a very wild experience being on this side of things. Instead of just sitting at home and watching the news nonstop and discussing politics like most of us do that love politics and wonks and care for this republic.
Time. Sorry.
Oh no!
Yeah, time was here. I'm sorry.
That's it? Oh my God,
Yeah.
really? Is that bad? All right, thank you. We will speak again.
I want to be sure that our timer can be seen.
Hi folks, I'm Steve Greenfield. Many of the people in this room do know me, and I'm glad to be here today. Thank you, Ward, thank you to the Chamber for allowing this open forum. I was born and grew up in New York City. I became an Eagle Scout and a paperboy in Howard Beach, Queens when I was 14. I attended Columbia College where I majored in economics. I live and work as an independent contractor, performing music throughout the district for over 17 years. I've been a volunteer firefighter for nearly 15 in New Paltz on mutual aid throughout Ulster County. I've been on the executive board for 10 of those years, as well as our company delegate to the Ulster County Firemen's Association, the Advocacy Wing. This is where I've been able to keep people's taxes down. I've been elected twice to the New Paltz School Board, where we consistently put out the best results at only the median cost per pupil, and where I chair the policy, facilities, and legislative action committees, drafted and negotiated passage of many pieces of effective legislation. I still serve the board in an appointed position on the Legislative Action Committee, where we design our legislative advocacy for public education. I won't pretend that this is where I got to keep people's taxes down, but it sure wasn't for lack of trying. Some of what I'm talking about is on that letter I distributed. It's on everyone's tables, and I hope you take a look at it. It's pretty important stuff. But the real problem, of course, is in the legislative bodies in Albany and Washington, who inhibit creative problem solving at the local level and mandate considerable cost drivers unrelated to instruction. But it sure was an education in why property taxes are what they are and what needs to be done about them. And with that as the largest tax bite most of us face, I think it puts me in good stead to know what to propose in Congress. I'm running on the Green Party line, which seems to scare a lot of people, mostly because the media does not allow much to be known about us. This being a 2-minute opening, I'll fill you in on that in my closing remarks, but I'll just tease you with this. It will save you a lot of money, provide local business with a level playing field with the mega corporations, enhance local autonomy, and shrink the federal government. That's our program. That's my personal record to date at many levels of public service. And thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Pastor.
Well, Ward, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for being here today. I think we need a bigger room in Kingston for these events. I also want to acknowledge my fellow candidates here and mention my wife, Mary Frances, married 38 years, where she's here with me this morning. And I appreciate all of you being here. As I look around the room, I see so many people that I have met and worked with over the last year and a half. It's been my privilege and honor to serve you as a member of Congress. I've worked hard on behalf of our farmers, on behalf of seniors, on behalf of our fire service, our veterans, throughout the last year and a half, and I look forward to having an opportunity to discuss these things. I congratulate Tim Massey and HealthQuest on the medical school. I think that's a fantastic endeavor. I also want to mention we'll be announcing today with Steve Kelly and the Ellenville Hospital and Dave Scarpino and the hospitals and health providers up in Columbia and Greene County a new grant that is coming into this district for the prevention and treatment of people who are addicted to opioids. This has been a focus of my attention in Congress. I'm pleased to say that the Senate just passed legislation that I was a main leader of in the House to prevent the infusion and of synthetic fentanyl coming from China through the U.S. Postal Service into our country. Fentanyl killed 20,000 Americans last year, and I've been in the forefront in Congress in trying to address this issue. And lastly, let me say, I am proud to be ranked number 18 out of 435 in the House of Representatives as being the most bipartisan member of Congress. In these polarized times in our country, we need to have people who will work constructively across the aisle with people on who you may not agree with all the time. That's what I've done, and if I am privileged and honored to serve another 2 years, that's exactly what I'll continue to do. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you, for Ulster County Chamber of Commerce. I too would like to acknowledge my lovely wife, Lacey, a daughter of Ulster County, born in Accord, raised in Woodstock. I also want to acknowledge my lovely mother-in-law, Peggy Schwartz, who I believe, like many of you, a small business owner for 40 or nearly 40 years, head of the Chamber of Commerce in Saugerties. It is a real pleasure yes, you can clap it up. It is a real pleasure to be before you this morning to talk about the issues. I think we've all got to a point where we're tired of not talking about the issues, particularly issues that pertain to working and middle-class Americans and not just a special few or big business. Now, you know, when I was growing up in upstate New York, born and raised Schenectady, my parents had the kind of jobs at GE that allowed us to work our way up to the middle class with hard work and determination. Unfortunately, that story is hard to come by now, no matter how hard you work. And it's in large part because the folks we keep sending to Congress don't prioritize working folk in small business. And the last year and a half makes that pretty clear. When you vote to take health care away from those who need it, to give a tax break to a wealthy few, that's not for working folk, that's not for small business. When you pass a tax bill that adds $1.5 trillion to our deficit and breaks the backs of working and middle class folks and bankrupts our future, that's not about working class and middle class folks and small business. But that's what I'm about, working class and small business growth. I don't believe that opportunity just trickles down. I believe you must invest in our future to make sure that it bubbles up. You must put more money in people's pockets so they can spend it on small businesses like yourselves that you own. Right? That is how we change. That is how we grow the economy in a healthy way. For too long, our government has enabled private greed rather than promote general welfare. Thank you.
A topic that many of us have on our minds, and it is if you were, Mr. Faso will answer this first, if you were elected or re-elected, how would you make sure health care costs are affordable? Mr. Faso.
And how long is this?
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
So, as you know, the health care legislation that House Republicans put forth, passed the House, did not pass the Senate. I supported that legislation. It protected people with pre-existing conditions, and it changed the paradigm so that we would provide subsidies to people who can't afford it to secure private insurance. And I still think that is a good approach. However, it did not pass, so as a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House, equally divided between Democrats and Republicans, we put forth a number of proposals that I think will be beneficial. Because small businesses tell me all the time, in fact, larger businesses tell me all the time, that they can't afford health care. And remember, when the Affordable Care Act was passed back in 2011 or 2009, 10, the Washington Post labeled the promise of the Affordable Care Act that if you like your doctor and your health care plan, you can keep it. And the notion that it would reduce premiums for every family by $2,500, they labeled that the lie of the year. And that came from the Washington Post. So we still have this problem of increasing premiums and deductibles. So the Problem Solvers Talk has said, let's allow small businesses to once again band together in association health plans, which the Affordable Care Act ended. Let's allow the businesses from with under 500 employees instead of 50 employees to be not covered by the employer mandate. That would greatly reduce compliance costs for small businesses, especially those between 50 and 500 employees. And most importantly, let's create a reinsurance system whereby insurers can be shielded from the cost of very high cost patients, and the reinsurance fund paid for by the federal and state governments would cover those costs so we can lower premiums and deductibles for everyone across the board. That is what I believe is a good integral step to go forward, and it's something I would support in the next Congress.
Mr. Greenfield is next, followed by Mr. Delgado, and then there's Neil.
This one's a really easy one. Single payer, period. I propose eliminating the income requirements for Medicaid, the age requirements for Medicare, some combination thereof, and to have that be the only thing. There's no such thing as being out of network when you have only one insurance pool that covers everybody. You get to keep the doctor you have, and you get to choose any new doctor that you want. I'm going to bring a piece of information here that I've never heard discussed before, but I'm aware of because of my 6 years being on a school board and being forced to put it on your property taxes. 15 to 20% of your property taxes today goes to paying for health insurance for public employees. So whatever you're paying every year in property insurance, 15 to 20% of it is going, could be eliminated overnight by doing this. People want to know, where does the money come from to pay for this? You're already paying it. You're paying it in your property taxes. You're paying it when people that work for you come to work and they're sick. They couldn't go to the doctor and they then infect your entire workplace, and then you have downtime, you lose. We can't afford to have this anymore. Every country, every industrialized country in the world does not include the cost of health care for the people of their country in the cost of their products. There is no way that people who are manufacturing and distributing products in this country can be competitive in a world economy when we have 20% of our gross domestic product being eaten up by healthcare every year. The rest of the industrialized world gets better results than we do for 50% to even as low as 33% of what we pay for here in the United States. This is not a big bridge to cross between Medicare, Medicaid, and Veterans Association and military TRICARE. More than 50% of the United States is already on single payer, and the other 50%, 100% of them have their insurance because of tax credits that make it possible for them to afford it, including you as employers when you offer it to them. Single payer is the way to go. It's the future. Let's get this together now and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you,
You know, everywhere I travel across this district, and it's big, there's no doubt that healthcare is the most important issue on people's minds. We're in crisis, not just from a health standpoint, but economically as well. I mean, hospitals are the biggest employers in the district. And I was traveling with KT Tobin, Deputy Mayor of New Paltz, and there was some canvassing. A gentleman walked out on his front porch. He talked about how he's going to give up his dialysis, stop it, because he was scared to bankrupt the children's future, his grandchildren's future. The man told me with a straight face he was prepared to die because he couldn't afford his treatment in the wealthiest country in the world's history. This is not a story that is unique to him. It's happening way too often for too many folks. It is long overdue. And it is sad to think that we're the only developed country in the world without some form of universal health care. Some form. And the notion that our current congressman felt the need to take health care away from folks here, increase those costs by virtue of a deciding vote, a vote that in fact rolled back guaranteed protections for pre-existing conditions, a vote that was against his promise to Andrea Mitchell, who I see over here today, cannot be tolerated. Now what am I for? I believe that we must at least provide folks the choice to opt into Medicare and create a public floor and make sure that we drive down premiums and deductibles. That'll also help small business owners like yourselves not have to worry about trying to find extra options when there's a public floor for your employees to do so on their own accord. It'll bring down premiums, it'll bring down deductibles. Also, if we make sure that Medicare has negotiating power with Big Pharma, that'll be a big driver down of all the costs that we're dealing with here in our healthcare crisis. My opponent here has never uttered those words, and I think it's important that we're clear on what we want to accomplish to really help healthcare. Thank you.
So the partisan approach to healthcare has really tainted the way things are. I mean, if you go back and you look at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? That's what we're all about in this country, the idea of America. Life, back then, was, you're worried about raids and the redcoats, things like that. Life today is healthcare, and it's really simple. And because of the factionalism and the partisan schism, people have missed the obvious, that single payer is actually a very fiscally conservative idea. And one of the things that we need to do is remove people that profit off of illness and people's death and things like that out of the decision-making process, right? That's just logical. If you profit off that, you don't need to do it. And if you're a small business owner, like I have been over the years, you know what providing healthcare costs. You don't have to do that anymore. You can hire more employees, you can expand, you can increase their work hours, you don't have to limit people to temp status. There are all kinds of amazing things that you can do that would actually boost the economy by a single payer system. I mean, even right now, things that we're doing, like Walmart, we subsidize almost all of their employees because we're paying taxes for Medicaid and Medicare and things like that. But the only way we're going to be able to get anything done in Congress is by making sure that the Republicans and the Democrats and everyone can work together towards a common goal. And it doesn't matter what reason you think that's important, whether it's fiscally conservative or a moral one where you think everyone should have health care. They have the same ends. So you have to get rid of the people, the lobbyists, all those things, and the only way to do that is to work together. And that's it. And as we all know, all the money in politics at the moment and all the giant contributions from things like healthcare corporations and pharmaceutical companies, they're not helping anything and they're not helping the people. And we all need healthcare. We need it desperately. And I'm one of those people that, seriously, I'm losing my healthcare on September 30th. I'm going to have to pay for COBRA. I'm very glad that I live in a state that I have an option. But there are ways that you can do it. You can do single payer that are fiscally conservative, that are smart, that are interesting, that actually you can keep incentives for progress and innovation. And there are. Thank you.
Our next question, Mr. Greenfield will answer first, followed by Mr. Delgado, Ms. Neal, and then Mr. Faso. Our company's biggest obstacle to success is too much regulation from the local, state, and federal level. What will you do in Congress to help, not hinder, small businesses like mine succeed? And Mr. Greenfield first.
That's a fantastic question. As a Green Party member, it's traditional for people to associate what we do with pushing for even more regulation on top of what you're already experiencing. But the difficulty that businesses have with regulation is not so much the goals of that regulation, but the way that they're implemented. Whenever we create regulations in this country, we create massive, expensive bureaucracies in order to manage them, micromanage them, generate paperwork and on top of paperwork, and people to review your paperwork and send you requests for more paperwork. So many of the goals of regulation are very important, right? I mean, much of the business in this district is about outdoor recreation and agriculture. And so if it weren't for regulation of chemicals being dumped into the Hudson River, we wouldn't have much of the business that Hudson River recreation generates today. So what we believe in the Green Party is decentralization. It's one of our 10 key values. We want to make whatever it is that has to be done to protect the environment and to protect worker health and to protect the air that you breathe while conducting your business. To be clear, but we don't want that to be an excessive burden on how it's going to cost you. And so we propose decentralization. We want things to be managed at the local level by local jurisdictions that know you, that you can visit and respond to and get your problems addressed. And so that the focus becomes more on achieving the goals of that regulation than building vast, expensive, and cumbersome federal bureaucracies to basically maintain them indefinitely, regardless of how they're working out. So thank you, that's how we approach it.
Mr. Delgado?
So I don't believe in big, bloated government. I believe smart, thoughtful government. And I think there's no better example where the government can sometimes go awry than how it has recently treated community banks and local banks in the same vein as the big banks that ultimately drove us into the crisis back in 2008. And we have a tendency, it seems, in government to want to have a sort of one-size-fits-all mindset, rather than being thoughtful and deliberative in terms of how we can make sure that we're empowering the folks who really need the help and penalizing the folks who really did the damage. And I think it's important from my vantage point that we focus again on how we make sure that small and community banks have the ability to lend to small business owners like yourselves without being inhibited by a regulatory framework that is not fair and disproportionately advantages big banks. Now it's interesting because the Senate just passed the bank bill, which interestingly enough, increased the threshold for stress tests for banks from 50 billion to 250 billion. And they did this because they wanted to obviously help small and local community banks, which I'm for, but then they were able to swoop in the big banks as part of this measure to continue to allow these big banks to run the same game that they've been able to do for too long that could, quite frankly, lead us right back where we started in 2008. We need thoughtful leadership here. You know, we need folks who are thinking about this from the standpoint of how we can surgically empower folks from the ground up and not tie every bit of advantage that a working or middle class folk get or a small business owner gets to big business or the super wealthy. It shouldn't be like that. We should be growing from the bottom up and putting more and more in front of people who need it, as opposed to giving it to folks who don't. Thank you.
So as we all know, federal regulations, the reason they were put in place is they were to protect citizens from being killed by giant corporations, right? That's what they're there for. But giant multinational global corporations don't really affect small businesses. And so I believe in consistency in law, but you can't put the same thing, you can't paint the same brush with giant multinational corporations where things like polluting rivers and things are important to small businesses and local businesses. So things need to be condensed down. And it's like Health Quest, things that we need to do to make business more attractive. They're investing $1 billion in our area, $1 billion, that's incredible. We need to be able to provide the infrastructure they need, roads, employees, people that can work, educated citizens. That's how we can help small businesses here, and that's a huge business, but as well as small businesses. But there's also one other thing that's really interesting. The blue wave, if the economy holds, is not going to be as big as people think it's going to be. And that's just the way it is. This is going to be a split house for the first time in a very long time. It's going to be very even down the middle. And as an independent, I could actually, as I represent the biggest voting bloc in this district, unaffiliated voters, be the first unbought, unpaid for independent in the House. Now, freshman congressmen, women don't usually have much of a say. However, if it's split and everyone needs your vote, and I don't have ambitions to be senator or president, I have ambitions to do one thing, and that's take care of the people in my district, because this is my home. And I can do all kinds of amazing things to get stuff done for us here. Every small business, everyone that needs it, my door would always be open. So you understand, the first vote in Congress that Congressman Foster will make is for maybe Kevin McCarthy or something like that. Antonio's will be for Nancy Pelosi. Mine will be for the people in this district. The first vote and every other vote. Thank you.
Mr. Council?
There's no doubt overregulation is a chronic issue for small businesses in our state and our nation. Much of the problem comes from Albany, some of it comes from Washington as well. We did roll back some of those regulations that Dodd-Frank imposed. It was enacted. I voted for it proudly because if you talk to Bill Calderero or Don Gibson from the Bank of Greene County, you'll find out that, as one banker told me, Dodd-Frank imposed regulations and I had to hire all of these new people to do compliance, and they prepared reports that no one read. And that's the fact. If you look at the Waters of the United States rule that we have thwarted, that came from the Obama administration, it would have regulated drainage ditches on farmers' land. And I've worked closely with the Farm Bureau on agricultural issues to reverse over-regulation that is imposing burdens upon them and other small businesses. That's why I've been supported by the National Federation of Independent Business and various business organizations throughout this state and district. I think that one of the important things, though, is that when we talk about over-regulation, you hear people up here talking about healthcare and expanding public options and everything like that. What that means is, in essence, they want to have a single-payer system, which is a $32 trillion increase. That's what it would cost. It would more than double taxation for the average family. And you know who would pay for it? Business owners, because so many in Congress on the left and so many in the radical left that's part of the Democratic Party that's driving the boat with Mrs. Pelosi and Mr. Delgado, frankly, they basically want to raise taxes because they want government control. Their view of the system and the country is we lack government control. They want more. And so I believe in less government control, more individual responsibility, more ground-up economic development, because that's the key. That's why we have over 4% economic growth. That's why we have more job openings in the country today than we have unemployed people.
So our next question, Mr. Delgado will start, then Ms. Neal, Mr. Faso, and then Mr. Greenfield. What will you do in Congress to ensure that Social Security and Medicare remain solvent? Mr. Delgado.
You know, it's interesting. The tax bill was passed, added $1.5 trillion to our deficit. Not long after that, we get a budget resolution that has deep cuts. Medicaid, $1.5 trillion, SNAP, $1 trillion. Education work programs, over $200 billion. All to pay for a tax break for a wealthy few. And I believe it was not long after the tax bill passed that we heard from Mr. Faso's leader, Paul Ryan, that we would have to cut Medicare, have to cut Social Security because we had to give all this money away to big corporations. So the first thing I would want to do, just to make sure we don't put ourselves in that position again, is repeal the tax bill. That might happen. I also note that over the last 40-some-odd years, wages have remained stagnant despite the fact that productivity has increased considerably. The top 10% last year captured more than 75% of all the income. Now, when the cap was introduced on Social Security, it captured about 90% of all the income. But when you have more and more wealth being trapped in the hands of just a few, then that cap does not really capture all the income it can and keep Social Security solvent. So here's what I think we should be considering. When you're a billionaire and you're really only paying about, what, half a percentage point of your overall income in Social Security, maybe you should pay more, particularly when you got folks who are paying 100% of their income in taxes in Social Security. Let's make this more fair. If we do that, we actually can extend the life of Social Security, put more security for people, and allow them to live out their lives in dignity. It's an earned benefit. Earned. Thank you.
Ms. Neal?
So you hear a lot of people that always say, yes, we gotta keep it, we've gotta save it, but you're right, you've gotta come up with a plan on how to do it. One of the things that I'm very, very big on is required service for the youth. It doesn't have to be military, it can be the police, like in a lot of other countries, it can be AmeriCorps, it can be the Peace Corps, it can be lots of different things. But the biggest employer on the planet at the moment is the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, which I love. I come from a very military family. Of my 7 cousins, 5 are downrange as we speak. So, but if you get a volunteer service, and you streamline, if anyone here, my parents are both federal employees that are retired now, and they're on Medicare. If anyone spent time doing paperwork, all the insanity that goes along with that stuff, the system needs to be streamlined, right? We need to cut out a lot of the bureaucratic fat because a lot of the money is going there. And if we're saving money on service from other people as well, that's enough money that can go into paying for an entire single-payer system It goes into preserving our Social Security for everybody. It goes into preserving everything that we need, the social programs that are the safety net that make America so fantastic, the things that we rely on, the things that we put money into for our entire working lives. So you have to come up with a plan how to do it, and I think that's an incredibly good plan. Again, though, it requires bipartisan effort. You have to work together. You have to use logic, and instead of voting along party lines just for the sake of party lines, you have to be able to discuss things with people on both sides to make some kind of consensus on how to save these programs and a way to do it that we can all get behind. So I think that's the way. And if any of you guys have teenagers and stuff like that, it's mandatory service, which is terrible mandatory service, but required service, getting kids out there, getting them a chance to see the world, getting them to participate in this life and have that opportunity is an incredibly great thing. And not only that, it would save our budget just so many billions of dollars that we could really put to good use elsewhere. Thank you.
Mr. Faso?
It's a timely question on Social Security and Medicare. The main thing we should do is what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did back in the early 80s, create a bipartisan commission. It was the Greenspan Commission. I've sponsored legislation to do just that, to take Social Security financing out of politics and to come up with bipartisan solutions. Because it's too important. Too many people rely upon it to have it be a political football. But we just heard my friend here, Mr. Delgado, say he wanted to remove the cap on Social Security. That means if you're a self-employed individual, you're going to pay 15% of your income on every dollar you make. Currently, the cap is $128,500. It goes up every single year. But if you subject every dollar that someone earns to the Social Security tax, that means you break the fundamental premise of Social Security, that it's an earned benefit. Because the person who's making $500,000 or $300,000 or even more, that person will expect a benefit that's commensurate with paying in $100,000 or $200,000 a year into the Social Security system. That is simply not viable. The founders of Social Security said it should be an earned benefit system, and that's why you have the cap that goes up every single year. Now, there's no doubt that we need to come to terms with the financing of Social Security, because in 2034, the trustees tell us it can only pay 79% of the promised benefits. So we have to fix it. It's safe for people who are over 50, but unless we fix it, it will not be there for people who are under 50. And that really is the fundamental generational issue that we have to deal with this issue. But to say take the cap off, you're self-employed, he just raised your taxes. He wants to reverse the tax bill. Well, that means the 20% pass-through for small businesses, gone. Means the tax cuts for individuals, gone. Because what does he want to do with the money? He wants to spend it like Nancy Pelosi does. I'm against it.
Mr. Greenfield?
This question might be one of the reasons that you need somebody who's trained in economics rather than a corporate lawyer going into Washington and taking at least one of those 435 seats. This is actually not hard. Yes, Social Security is supposed to be an earned benefit. And yes, acknowledging what Mr. Delgado just said, we all know that wages and salaries have not changed relative to inflation in 40 years now. While GDP over that time, real GDP, has tripled. So the idea that it's an earned benefit has been undermined by the way we have failed to distribute increasing productivity to all working people equally as that time has been going by. So something needs to be done about that. We also need to end the practice that's been going on for about 30 years now of pretending that the federal budget is not what it is by borrowing money from the Social Security fund and applying it to the general fund. Because that's a sleight of hand, and that's been one of the biggest things undermining the present and future of Social Security. So we're going to stop that right away. About shoring up Medicare and making sure that will continue to be available, that's simple also, and I already mentioned that. The way to save Medicare is to make it available to everybody instead of just to the elderly. And I heard Mr. Faso here explain that that is going to involve a major tax increase, but I already explained earlier that it's actually going to be done at a considerable savings, because that money's going to come right off your property taxes, not just for a single year, but in perpetuity. So you know what you're paying right now. Most of you paying commercial rate as well, on top of your residential rate that you have at your house. And that's going to go away immediately. People who are dealing with union labor, the biggest thing that you have to deal with in contract negotiations, which is those health plans, goes off off the table and you get right down to the things you really want to negotiate about. This is really a simple matter. Like I said, let's get one seat open in Congress for someone whose background is in economics and not a corporate lawyer. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Greenfield. The next question in order, we'll have Mr. Faso, then Mr. Greenfield, Mr. Delgado, then Ms. Neal. I am concerned about the future for my children and my grandchildren. How do we lower, reduce, eliminate our national debt? Mr. Faso.
Economic growth is the main way to do that. When under the prior administration, President Obama and his advisors said we should get accustomed to the new paradigm of economic growth in the 1 to 1.5% range. That simply is not fast enough in terms of growth to provide jobs and opportunity for young people and to pay for the promises that we've already made. Let's face it, the fact of the matter is that what is driving all of the issues in terms of the debt and the deficit, in terms of our healthcare costs, in terms of so many of the other issues that we're going to have to grapple with, Social Security expenses and Medicare, for instance, it's demographics. Demographics, as Nathan Glazer once said, is destiny. It is the fact is that we have smaller families, that we have many people in the baby boom generation retiring at a rate of 10,000 a day, and so we're looking at much longer life spans for people, which is wonderful because of our medical technology. But at the same time, we don't have enough in terms of people coming behind to sustain these systems. And that's why what we need is growth. That's why the tax bill, for instance, by ending the double taxations for our companies that do business overseas, if they earn profit overseas, like Apple, and they brought the dollars back home, they got double taxed. And when the tax bill passed, which I had opposed for other reasons on the SALT deduction, but when the tax bill passed, Apple announced they were repatriating over $238 billion worth of foreign-earned Apple profits back to the United States, paying $38 billion worth of taxes, creating 20,000 new jobs over the next 10 years in the United States. And so our corporate tax system was the highest in the world. My opponent wants to raise taxes on those very companies who are bringing jobs back to the United States. It doesn't make sense. He would raise taxes on small businesses and on individuals. That is not a prescription for growth.
Mr. Greenfield.
Thank you. I would actually like to draw everybody's attention once again to the paper I left on everybody's table. Yes, obviously what we need is growth, but the only way we can have growth is if people have spending money after they've paid for their rent and their food. And so right now, although wages appear to be increasing, that is only nominal wages. Real wages relative to inflation have actually been falling in recent times, which is the exact opposite direction we want to go. That means that people are working, they're working longer hours, they have less time to have a consumption budget, and they have less of a consumption budget. So if you're not a landlord or the owner of a supermarket, this economy is currently working against you. Okay, the growth is dependent on whether people actually have a consumption budget. The only uncertainty that really matters when you're in business is whether or not you're going to have any customers. This is something I face every time I go out to work as a musician and see fewer and fewer people coming out every night. I am dependent on people feeling like they have available time and discretionary income above what they need for their necessities. So we need to do something about wages. Today's minimum wage would have to be $25 an hour to have the purchasing power that it had in 1978. And obviously that's not realistic, so we need some big changes in how we set tax policy.
Mr. Delgado.
I remember when Republicans cared about a balanced budget and fiscal responsibility. You know, in 2010, deficit was about $1.5 trillion. Got it down to about 400 or so billion by 2016. And during the time, Mr. Faso was in Congress, and Republicans have controlled it. It's ballooned back up to $800 billion. That sounds like bloated government. It sounds like there's a lot of debt being accumulated under a Republican-controlled House and Senate. You know, it didn't help that tax bill, which added $8.5 trillion to our deficit. Now, I'm not quite sure which side Faso comes down with the tax bill. He's got some back and forth on this. He seems to be not sure either where he stands. But it's important, I'd say, where I stand. And that is that the tax bill was a problem. And it is important that we use the revenue we gave away to invest in our infrastructure, roads, rail, broadband access, cell service, and generate economic growth from the ground up. Put more money in people's pockets so they can spend it. That is how the economy can grow, and not just hope that it somehow trickles down to everybody else, when the only thing that seems to trickle down is a crisis, time and time again. Thank you.
Neil?
So obviously the exploding deficit is something that we all really need to be concerned about, but a lot of it is just due to rampant stupidity. So take for example the tariffs that are totally unnecessary that are on our agriculture, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So we're saying, oh, okay, these are bad tariffs, they're gonna negatively, adversely affect our people that are farmers and work in agriculture industry. So then let's give them subsidies. Well, where are we gonna get the money from the subsidies? Oh, let's borrow the money from China. Oh, that's great, let's pay interest on that. Absolutely none of that makes sense. It's a complete waste of money, we're paying interest on it, and it explodes the budget. Just don't do the tariffs in the first place. But again, these are things that just require logic and reason and being able to speak to one another and figure out what is the best plan of action. Also, this is another place where single-payer healthcare system is actually incredibly fiscally conservative. You know, our economy loses billions and billions and billions of dollars every year because of illness and a lack of preventive health care. So when you're providing those things to people, and businesses, small businesses especially, are having to provide those things, then people are actually taking care of themselves. We're getting more effective workers. People are putting more hours into the economy, and it's growing. Yay.
Thank you very much. Next question, Mr. Delgado will answer first, then Ms. Neal, Mr. Greenfield, and Mr. Faso. Why will your work in the House be the most effective in dealing with the challenge of climate change? Mr. Delgado.
The climate change crisis, solving the climate change crisis, is a moral imperative. And I know and appreciate that Mr. Faso talks a lot about being on the bipartisan commission, but it's important to note that the Legal Conservation Voters has, I think, given him a voting score of about 34%. It's also important to note that he's voted to repeal the Stream Protection Rule, voted for a farm bill that guts provisions in the Clean Water Act, as well as the Clean Water Rule being repealed, which, to be clear, does not impact farmers in the way that you might suggest. We need somebody who actually can be thoughtful and committed to dealing with the problem of climate change, and not just sit on commissions, but actually do the work. As I traveled across this district and understood the value that the environment brings to bear, whether it's the $400 million of value that the Delaware River produces, one of the best fisheries in the Northeast U.S., or whether it's the Hudson River and all that it provides to our communities. We have got to make sure that we have clean air and clean water. And that means stop propping up the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $4 billion a year. Fossil fuel industry is not needing our help anymore. They're doing okay. All the economic growth lies in the renewable energy space. Wind, solar, geothermal. These are where we can grow. And let's be clear, solar grows at 17 times the rate right now of the overall economy. So let's debunk this myth that somehow you can't create jobs to protect the environment at the same time. I got news for you. In fact, that's exactly how you create jobs. And that is exactly how we generate a new economic model for growth for generations to come. We are being left behind in the Western world because of our lack of innovation and commitment to figure out technologies that allow us to live in a more energy efficient world. And we should be pursuing this endeavor with great desire and determination. Thank you.
Ms. Neal?
Once again, this is another area where just getting rid of factionalism and partisanship would make the most sense. First of all, you've got the most basic thing in the world, right? To be alive, to have that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you actually need air to breathe and water to drink. That's really important. Also, too, we have an incredible amount of resources here in the Hudson Valley where we could become the Silicon Valley of renewables. We've got things like the Hudson River. We can do things like water turbines there. The solar number is incredible here. We have wind that is at a higher speed at a rate than any other places. We have so many things that we can do here that not only increase jobs and increase infrastructure, increase other things, Because, Antonio's right on this point. Investing in fossil fuels is kind of like, let's just open a bunch of blockbusters. It doesn't make any sense. Everybody's streaming video now. Things move forward. So you have to decide, okay, that doesn't make sense. What can we do now? What can we do to make things move forward here and provide jobs for the future? Also, I take a lot of classes and I study a wide variety of things. And at school, one of my recent classes at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Naval War College was on national defense strategy and policy. Now, the biggest issue for national security at the moment is climate change. It is massive. So if you're on the right and you care about things like national security, yeah, we get climate refugees. We've got all kinds of starvation, droughts, things like that are moving mass migrations of people that cause conflict. That's how the conflict in Syria started. That's how you get doctors willing to spend, 14 days in a tiny raft watching their family members die just to hopefully make it to a Greek isle. Climate change, that's it. It is our biggest national security policy issue, and that's why we have to confront it, whether you're on the left or the right. And again, because everybody's so factionalized, one believes tippy-tippy and the other one believes it's not important, not real. That's asinine. We're all smart people. We know that things need to be worked on together, solutions to be made together, and just sticking along party lines for the sake of party lines isn't getting a damn thing done. And so I suggest that, if you care about either one of those things, our national security, or you care about air and water to breathe and water to drink, that we work together.
Mr. Greenfield? I'm sorry, John. I'm sorry, it was Steve's turn, I think. Yep, you're right. Sorry, my fault.
This is probably the single biggest area where, party affiliation matters. We've got one party that believes that climate change is either not real or not much of a big deal. And we've got another party who seems to be acknowledging that it's a big deal, but wants to have a very open and incremental timetable about how we take care of it. I first proposed what I called back then in 2002 a conversion to a fossil fuel economy back when I ran for Congress in 2002. If we had started on that project now, that was a really long time ago, we would be up to phase 2. Mr. Delgado has declined to endorse Tulsi Gabbard's OFF Act, which sets a timetable forward to 2035 in which to convert our power generation to all renewable sources. I can't imagine how anybody thinks that 2035 for that one segment of the project is too aggressive a timetable. I'm a firefighter. I was just out there dealing with floods last week. I'm going to be out there dealing with floods next week. I'm the guy that's up there at Sam's Point and Cragsmoor fighting these wildfires. You all know the devastation that we're facing, and you also know the unbelievable amount of jobs that can be created by putting an aggressive timetable on this. What I call the Green New Deal. I encourage you to get on my website and look at that. It's the equivalent of the Tennessee Valley Authority project that takes our infrastructure and the delivery of our energy systems and invests in putting it all on an aggressive timetable for conversion to renewable energy immediately. This is not a crisis that is slowly creeping up on us. This is a crisis that we already let go by. It's not even here today. We already let it go by. I'm out there putting my life on the line on a regular basis trying to mitigate it for all of you, but we've got to go out there right now and decide that this is the equivalent of a national emergency and that's how we're going to treat it. And if you elect one Green Party member, that conversation is finally going to be on the floor of Congress. Thank you.
There's no doubt climate change is real, and I'm a member of the Climate Change Caucus, again, a bipartisan group in the House. I've sponsored legislation dealing with this issue. I also voted against an amendment on the House floor sponsored by Republicans that would have told the Defense Department not to consider the impacts of climate change on our national defense. And that amendment didn't pass because 40 or 50 Republicans voted against it. This is real. It's a real issue. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge we've made great progress. We have greatly reduced CO2 emissions in New York State, for instance, by 20-25% over the last 20 years because we've substituted natural gas for coal. And natural gas is a much better source of power for electric generation than coal. And that's what's happening. The economics of natural gas production have made it so that we have coal is uneconomic. The nuclear power plants on Lake Ontario in New York State are now being specially subsidized because natural gas has made those plants uneconomic. I support, for instance, I don't think my opponent does, Cricket Valley over in Dover, which is creating over 1,000 construction jobs. It's going to provide clean energy that is needed for the state to replace Indian Point. And it's also going to greatly lower real estate taxes for the school district in Dover and the communities in eastern Dutchess County. So the issue here is not whether you believe climate change exists. I do. The question is, how do you accomplish the needs that we have within the economic framework that we have without bankrupting farmers and small businesses? And this is what they do. The Farm Bureau says the Clean Water Rule would have destroyed their ability. Forcing a farmer in Ulster County or throughout upstate New York to go to the Corps of Engineers to get a permit for a drainage ditch on their property isn't good. Mr. Delgado doesn't think that's a problem. The Farm Bureau does, however. Who would you believe?
Thank you very much. We are at the point where we are offering closing statements. We are reversing the order from the opening statements, and so Mr. Delgado will go first. 2 minutes, yes, sir.
Well, this was good. I appreciate coming out this morning to speak with all of you. I appreciate all my fellow colleagues here on the stage. I'm happy we were able to speak about the issues. Now, the choice is clear here, in my estimation. I think you've got a good taste. The contrast. I'm about the future. I'm about thinking about what this place can look like for generations to come. And making sure that we can restore the sort of upward mobility for working and middle class families that was here when I and my wife were growing up in upstate New York. The trends for too long have been going in the wrong direction. And the fact is, we keep sending folks to Congress who seem more and more determined to maintain the status quo, despite the fact that it is broken, at the people's expense, at our future's expense. And we can't tolerate that anymore. We need real bipartisanship, we do. But it can't just be a catchphrase, it actually means something through your deeds and through your conduct. We need folks who are thinking about how to solve the healthcare crisis, and not just take healthcare away, and not make false promises to their constituents repeatedly, and do so on camera. It's deeper than just policy. It's about your integrity. It's about your character. It's about your accountability. It's about your willingness to be true and straight with the people who send you to Congress, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. We got too much on the line right now in this country. There's a cruelty and an immorality that is coursing through our country's political veins. And we need to stop with the baseless, personal nastiness out there and get back to substance. Get back to the work. Get back to good government. If we do this, we can turn this thing around. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I hope to have your support. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you, Ward and the Chamber, and thank all of you for coming, and thank my fellow candidates for participating. I agree, it is a stark choice. The question is whether or not you believe the federal government has the solution to every problem that we face as a country, or whether we believe the private sector and local creativity and initiative can solve these problems and do a better job. And the fact of the matter is, I've spent more than 35 years living and working in this district, raising a family, participating in public service in the private sector in this district, working hard to try to make a difference for people. I've done that on the opioid crisis in our district. I've done that for veterans. I've done that for small businesses, and I'll continue to do it if reelected to Congress. My friend over here, who just moved into the district last year, when he votes in November, it will be the very first time he's ever cast a ballot for Congress in this district. He has no experience or dedication in this district. He just moved in, and a week later decided to run for Congress. We've seen this act before. We've seen this from the last couple of Democrats that ran. They move up from the city, they come into the district, and they think all of a sudden they know everything that there is to know about the 19th Congressional District. Well, I can tell you, what we need to do in America is restore faith, and that's why I'm working on a bipartisan basis in Congress. The proof is in the pudding. I ranked 18th out of 435, and I certainly believe that our best days are ahead of us. I believe that America is a good and a great place. We have our imperfections, certainly. We're going to have vigorous political discourse over the next few weeks, and let the people render their judgment, and that is how it should be. I believe in this country, I believe in America, and God bless this great country. Thank you so much.
Mr. Greenfield.
And I'm going to read again a little bit because there's a couple of things I just can't afford to leave out. So about the Green Party, as promised, and why I choose to run on that line. Yes, we have an elevated focus on the environment compared to either of the majors, but that's a big plus in the 19th district, where so much of our economy is dependent upon outdoor recreation and agriculture. Yes, we care very deeply about peace and poverty, because neither of the major parties do, and that is intolerable in a culture that calls itself civilized. The United States is the richest nation in the history of the world, but according to our own CIA World Factbook, we are currently 56th from the top in infant mortality, not even in the top 25% of the world, and in which we are surpassed by several third world countries. The only reason we haven't fixed that is because the media and literally 100% of the candidates from both major parties never mention it. We do. But we also differ very much from both major parties in that we are a party of small government and decentralization. Our approach to problems at home and on the world stage is not to jack up taxes, borrowing, and federal bureaucracies, but to reduce all three by starting first with saving money being wasted on things harming our economy, environment, quality of life, government systems, and world standing, and then designing curative policies for what remains that are handled at the local level by people already in place who know what's happening on the ground and can be nimble and efficient in addressing it, and not by cumbersome, remote, and expensive federal institutions. If you put me in Congress, I'll make sure it turns out to be worth your while. If that doesn't happen in this one election cycle, you can be sure I'll still be here, as I always have, fighting the fires, managing fire administration, crafting education policy, taking 50-mile fundraising hikes in Mohawk, playing music in our town parks, car shows, fairs, and night spots, and generally supporting the affordability and quality of life in this district. Thank you very much for having me down here today.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate all of you. So, New York 19 is an incredibly special place, as we all know. And this is the time. And this is the place, and we are the people that can make an example to the rest of the country. The largest voting bloc in this district are unaffiliated voters, and there's a reason for that. It's because we all have an intrepid, independent spirit. Whether you came to the concert in '69 and you stayed and you sung my organic beats, or you're my Trumper prepper neighbor who's awesome and gives me the most incredible venison all winter long, we have this independent spirit that unites us. We're people that think for ourselves, we decide for ourselves, and we listen to each other. Part of the great thing about having horrible information infrastructure here is that we actually have to talk to our neighbors, and we can't rely on people on Twitter and Facebook to just be like, oh yeah, I agree with you all the time. We actually have to have concern for the people we live with and care. And we have this incredible opportunity at the moment. As this group of people who are intrepid and independent, we can send somebody to Congress that is beholden to no one but the people here. Don't answer to party leaders, lobbyists, big money, big parties, big anything else. You don't have to make decisions for anyone but my neighbors and the people I care about. I want to live here for the rest of my life. I don't want to go anywhere else. And so I better go and do a really good job because I don't want people being nasty to me when I come home. And I guarantee you, I'll come home every weekend because I love it. I'm still not giving away my fishing spots. But we need an advocate. We have enough advocates in Congress. For lobbyists, for lawyers, for corporations, for people like that. We don't have anyone advocating for us. And that's why I'm running, and that's why I want to go to Congress. And I believe we are the people that can do it. We can do it together, and we can work together. And the things that we can get done in this district with this rare opportunity are incredible. And I would love it if you would send me there. Thank you.
So we thank you all for coming this morning on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. We appreciate you being here and showing respect to all of our candidates. Can we have a nice round of applause for all four candidates?